The smell of bleach clung to Zarah Miller's skin like regret, bitter and inescapable. Her rubber gloves squeaked faintly as she scrubbed the last sink. In the executive floor's marble bathroom, the overhead light humming its dull, fluorescent song, 11 hours into her shift at Thornton Technologies, the gleaming, mirrored fortress of innovation and wealth, her lower back ached with a deep, hollow pain that no doctor had ever fully explained. Poverty rarely had the luxury of diagnosis. She stood slowly, wincing, and wiped her forehead with the edge of her sleeve. Midnight had passed. The building was supposed to be silent now, the kind of quiet where secrets go to sleep. But tonight, something was different. She pushed her cart into the hallway. Polished tile reflected her movement like a ghost, her figure blending into the chrome and glass corridors of the executive level. Her cart wheels clicked softly with each turn, her every step a whisper in the silence of million-dollar decisions. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. "Lily, Mommy, did you eat?" A second later, another message popped up. "Lucy, we made a new math game. Want to play when you get home?" Zarah's heart softened. Her girls were supposed to be asleep. 9 years old, full of questions and mischief, their minds forever spinning. Sometimes she thought they shared a single brain, split between the bubbly personalities. Lily with her endless curiosity, Lucy with her sharp, calculating eyes. Twins who corrected their teachers' mistakes and solved puzzles backward just to see if they could. She started typing a reply. "Almost done. Angels. Be home soon," when she froze mid-keystroke. Voices low, urgent, and leaking through the walls of the conference room at the far end of the hall. The thick, frosted glass was supposed to be soundproof, but stress doesn't stay contained. It seeps. Zarah edged closer, cleaning cloth still in hand. She wasn't snooping, not really. She just paused, a statue next to her cart, half in shadow. "I don't care if we poured 6 months into it," snapped a voice, sharp, authoritative. It rang with control, but cracked beneath the surface. "If this algorithm isn't operational by the end of the month, we're looking at a $300 million hit. Do you understand that?" Zarah's breath caught. 300 million. It didn't compute. She barely made 18,000 a year. The number felt obscene, like it belonged in a movie, not echoing from behind a frosted glass wall just 10 feet away from her mop bucket. A second voice responded, faster, nervous. "We've thrown everything at it, Richard. It's not just the volume. The recursive chains collapse the simulation. Our processors can't keep up with the real-time adaptive functions. It's a dead end." Zarah didn't understand most of the jargon, but she didn't need to. These men, the ones in $1,000 suits who never looked her in the eye, were scared. The kind of fear that made powerful people dangerous. She shrank back as footsteps neared the door. Her heart pounded. She reached for her cart and began to move, slow and steady, like she belonged there. Like she hadn't just witnessed the unraveling of something massive. As she walked away, a fragment of another sentence chased her down the corridor. "If we don't fix it, we'll have to notify the board outside." The night pressed against the windows like a secret trying to get in. And Zarah Miller, invisible, unimportant, and utterly exhausted, pushed her cart forward, unaware that her daughters would soon hold the answer to a crisis that brought billionaires to their knees. The apartment was a modest sanctuary of second-hand furniture and warm, flickering light that danced against the worn wallpaper. It was a stark contrast to the sterile corridors of Thornton Technologies, yet it held its own magic, one woven through shared secrets and whispered giggles. Zarah had barely closed the door behind her after a grueling night, when she found her twin daughters wide awake in their small, shared room. Instead of the usual rush of sleepiness, their eyes were alight with restless curiosity. The room was softly illuminated by a single lamp that threw long shadows against the faded walls. Lily, with her unruly curls and a mind constantly ticking with thoughts beyond her years, was already scribbling numbers and symbols on a piece of paper. Lucy, ever the meticulous one, balanced a set of colorful markers at her fingertips as if they were keys to some hidden treasure. Their persistent chatter filled the quiet space, a natural counterpoint to their mother's later sighs of tired relief. "Mommy, what's a supply chain?" Lucy asked, her voice a curious mix of determination and wonder. As she paused from her calculations, Lily looked up from her drawings, her expression earnest. "Yeah, how do things get from one place to another? And how can something go wrong with so many numbers?" Their question, innocent yet profound, hung in the air like a fragile promise of discovery. Zarah hesitated before answering. She wasn't a mathematician, nor did she comprehend the labyrinth of industrial logistics that defined her boss's daytime nightmares. But tonight, spurred by the dangerous urgency that had been whispered through the halls of the tech giant, she saw a glimmer of a chance. "I don't know everything," she admitted softly, sitting down beside them, "but I do know that sometimes, even the best plans can unravel, and sometimes, simple thinking can fix what complex minds can't see." Her words seemed to act as a spark in the darkness. The twins exchanged a conspiratorial glance, and without another word, the room transformed into their very own laboratory. Using scraps of paper and an old whiteboard they had rescued from a community donation, Lily and Lucy set about reconstructing what they imagined the supply chain looked like. They drew swirling lines like rivers, connecting vast, abstract-shaped symbols for factories, warehouses, and digital pathways. Their markers traced patterns across the board, mingling logic with wild, unfiltered creativity. Hours slipped by unnoticed as the clock ticked in rhythm with their fervor. Every new hypothesis brought a surge of excitement, every misstep a lesson, taught by the raw, unbridled genius of youth. They laughed when their drawings took on a life of their own, vivid, almost animate characters that played out the tale of how numbers moved and transformed. Every so often, Lucy would tap her pencil against the board, the sound echoing like a punctuation mark in their growing narrative of discovery. Outside, the city hummed with the quiet sounds of night, oblivious to the revolutionary ideas unfolding. In a cramped apartment, the girls' ideas flowed from their conversation into the language of math and mystery. They began to theorize. Maybe the problem wasn't with the numbers at all, but with the way they nested inside layers of code. Perhaps the algorithm had become too rigid, like a frozen waterfall, unable to adapt when the torrent of data rushed through. Their young minds whirled with possibilities that defied the limits of conventional knowledge. As the night deepened and the first hues of dawn began to tint the sky, the twins found themselves on the cusp of an epiphany. Their sketches had evolved into a coherent plan, a simple yet groundbreaking fix that unraveled the tangles of the supply chain's failure. It was as though the soft light of early morning had illuminated a path hidden behind the veil of complexity. In that fragile moment, while the city was yet to wake and the world was still turning in its quiet slumber, Lily and Lucy discovered not only the mechanics of a supply chain, but the promise that brilliance can emerge anywhere, even in the unlikeliest of places. Their whispered excitement filled the small room, a defiant declaration that genius isn't confined by circumstance or age. It simply waits for the courage to unfold its wings. Nightfall the next day arrived like a quiet dare. The city outside Thornton Technologies was winding down, streetlights flickering to life, casting long golden fingers across the pavement. Inside the towering building, the lights on the executive floor were dimming one by one, signaling that the empire of steel, glass, and sleepless ambition was finally pausing, at least on the surface. But in the shadows, a different kind of genius was stirring. Zarah Miller stood near the service entrance, her janitor's uniform freshly ironed. Her nerves stretched thin, her badge trembled slightly in her hand. Tonight, she wasn't just clocking in for another shift tonight. She was smuggling revolution into a place that worshipped degrees, titles, and 9-digit contracts. Her daughter stood behind her, too small for this building, too bright for its walls. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, kneeling to their height. Her voice cracked from exhaustion, but not from doubt. Lily grinned, eyes sparkling. "You said they had a math problem." Lucy nodded, clutching the worn canvas backpack that carried their notebooks, a calculator, to protein bars, and a single flash drive that would later bring a billion-dollar company to its knees. "We just want to help, Mommy," you said they're stuck. Zarah hesitated one last time. She could still turn around, call it off, tell them this was foolish. But then she remembered the look in Richard Thornton's eyes behind the frosted glass. Not anger, not frustration, fear. Real fear, the kind she'd seen in the mirror too many times when rent was late and shoes were too tight for growing feet. That kind of fear didn't belong to just one class. She swiped her badge. The door hissed open. Inside, the building was a sleeping giant, its corridors quiet and humming with distant servers. The flicker of LED lights across security panels was their only witness. As the trio slipped in like ghosts, no one expected intruders here, not on the 41st floor, especially not ones under 5 feet tall. Zarah led the twins to a quiet side room near the back of the floor room for 1AC. A forgotten tech cubby with 2 unused terminals in a view of the night skyline. It had once belonged to a junior engineer who'd been let go months earlier, but no one had bothered to reclaim the space. The girls pulled out their notebooks and plugged in the flash drive. They worked fast, typing side by side, hands flying. Like pianists lost in duet, line after line of code filled the screen. The language foreign to Zarah, but sacred to them. They weren't children here. They were architects of logic, decoding a puzzle that had stumped PhDs and AI alike. Down the hall, Zarah kept watch, cleaning cloth in hand, pretending to polish chrome. Her heart thundered with every footstep, every creak, every elevator bell. If they were caught, if someone even suspected, they could be arrested, fired, humiliated. But she couldn't stop this. Something bigger than fear was unfolding. Back in the room, Lucy frowned at a blinking error message. No, it's too recursive. The chain keeps folding in on itself. Lily, lean over. Because it's trying to be perfect, we have to teach it to give up sometimes. That's what people forget. Perfection isn't efficient. She rewrote the core function. An elegant compromise written in fewer than 10 lines. It was almost poetic in its simplicity. A supply chain optimization code that understood when not to compute further. Outside, thunder cracked faintly in the distance, as if the universe itself were bracing for what was to come. Suddenly, Lucy gasped. It worked. We bypassed the bottleneck. On screen, the simulation bloomed into motion. Nodes lit up in synchronized clarity, pathways balanced, distribution channels stabilized. The entire grid, previously chaotic, began to sing. With order, Zarah entered the room just as the girls high-fived each other. She stared at the screen, not understanding what she saw, but recognizing something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Let's go, Lucy whispered. Before someone sees, Lily saved the file to a second flash drive. We should leave. It where someone will have to look. They shut everything down, wiped their fingerprints, erased the log history. As they crept back down the hallway, Zarah caught sight of Richard Thornton's office door, closed, silent. Beyond it, the fate of a tech empire teetered on the edge of collapse. She paused, then slowly, carefully, placed the flash drive in. A plain envelope, sealed it, and slid it under his door. No signature, no note, just truth. Then they disappeared into the night, 3 shadows against the glass walls of power, leaving behind nothing but a line of silent code and a ticking bomb of brilliance. Tomorrow, the world would change, and no one would see it coming. Ass checked. Rain slicked the streets in silver as dawn crept up behind the skyline. The city was still sleeping, unaware that somewhere in its towering heart, a fuse had already been lit. Inside Thornton Technologies, the 41st floor remained dark, hushed like the calm before a storm. No one noticed the envelope lying just inside the CEO's office door. It waited silently, holding within it not a threat, but a solution, not a virus, but salvation. Meanwhile, across town, Zarah Miller stirred a pot of oatmeal on a crooked stove. The apartment was still wrapped in soft shadows, the faint blue of morning peeking through paper-thin curtains. Lily and Lucy sat at the kitchen table, whispering between mouthfuls of cereal. They weren't speaking about toys or cartoons. They were debating multivariable convergence loops, animatedly mimicking how they taught the stubborn algorithm to think like a human. You have to tell him, Mommy, Lily said suddenly. You should go to the boss man. Zarah turned, startled. What? Lucy nodded, more serious. You gave him the flash drive. But what if he doesn't look at it? What if he throws it away? Zarah didn't answer at first. Her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts: fear, pride, dread. She had done something unthinkable. Trespassed, risked her job, trusted the judgment of 2 9-year-olds over the highest-paid engineers in the world. And yet, deep down, she knew what she saw on that screen last night wasn't just impressive. It was extraordinary. But now came the hardest part, being heard. At 9 a.m. sharp, Richard Thornton entered his office with the force of a man who had built an empire from code and caffeine. His tie was immaculate, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The board was threatening to pull funding. The press was sniffing around for signs of collapse. Competitors were circling like vultures. He barely noticed the envelope on the floor. It wasn't until 30 minutes later when his assistant knocked on his door with a fresh round of emails from analysts predicting quarterly disaster that Thornton, half annoyed, half distracted, picked it up. It wasn't branded. No name. Just a standard office envelope. He almost tossed it, but something about its weight stopped him. A flash drive. Just one. Richard sat down, inserted the drive into his terminal, and clicked. What loaded wasn't just code, it was a mirror to the very heart of his company's most catastrophic problem. He sat forward, scrolled, eyes narrowing. Then he saw it. The missing piece, the loop breaker, a line of logic so beautifully efficient, so deceptively simple, it made him freeze. His pulse quickened. He ran the simulation. The entire grid lit up. Processing time, 13.4 seconds. Accuracy, 99.87%. He stared, ran it again and again, every time. The system snapped into clarity. The bottleneck dissolved. Logistics realigned. The algorithm wasn't just working, it was thinking smarter than it had ever been allowed to. It had learned to bend. Thornton stood so fast, his chair slammed against the window. He picked up the office phone. Get Marcus, Jenna, and the entire logistics team in the main boardroom in 10 minutes. I don't care what they're doing. Move. By the time the executives were seated, bleary-eyed and half suspecting a scolding, the lights were dimmed and the projector was on. Richard Thornton stood at the head of the table, but he wasn't shouting. He wasn't pacing. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous with disbelief. I'd have just run a new model. Murmurs. Something, someone, rewrote the core logic and solved it. No one spoke. He turned toward the screen. The simulation ran behind him like a revelation. Not just solve, elevated it. This code isn't from any of you. Eyes widened. It was anonymous. Delivered directly to my door. Marcus leaned forward. From where? Who? Thornton's voice dropped. We're going to find out. Because whoever did this just saved us $300 million. The room fell dead silent. Then came a slow, tentative question from the corner. Sir, what if it was a breach? Thornton shook his head. If this was a breach, it was a blessing. I want IT on every log file, every access point. Now, and as the room broke into ordered chaos, none of them knew that the woman who mopped their floors and smiled politely in elevators was sitting on a city bus miles away holding a worn lunchbox, watching rain trace lines down the window and wondering if she was about to be fired or discovered. Because the fire she lit last night was now burning through the heart of a giant, and giants, when startled, don't always wake up gentle. Ask Chag. The summons came at 6:47 p.m. Zarah was rinsing dishes in the cramped kitchen when her old flip phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't the ringtone she used for the twins. It wasn't even the faint chime of a reminder alarm. It was the one she almost never heard, the company line. Her stomach clenched. Thornton HQ reception desk, the screen read. She stared at it for a beat too long, heart hammering in her chest. Then slowly, cautiously, she answered, Zarah Miller? The voice was clipped, professional, unfamiliar. Yes, she said, her throat dry. Mr. Thornton is requested to see you, immediately, 41st floor, main boardroom. Zarah's hand tightened on the edge of the sink. At this late? There was a pause. He's waiting. The line went dead. Lily and Lucy had stopped playing on the living room floor. They were watching her, eyes wide, sensing the shift in the air. Zarah turned to them, unsure whether to hug them or cry. Mommy, Lily asked. Lucy tilted her head. Is it about the code? I don't know, Zarah whispered. I think so. I need to go in. The girls stood up, crossing the tiny room to her. They didn't look scared. They looked ready. We believe in you, Lily said, placing the flash drive's empty case in her hand like it was a torch. Lucy hugged her waist. Just tell the truth. Zarah nodded, barely holding it together. I'll be back soon. The cab ride to Thornton Tower felt like a slow ascent to the edge of a cliff. The city blurred past the windows, each intersection. A beat in her spiraling thoughts. She rehearsed what she'd say, how she'd explain, how she'd protect her daughters without mentioning their names. What if it backfired? What if they accused her of stealing intellectual property? What if the police were waiting upstairs when the elevator doors opened to the 41st floor? The hallway felt colder than usual, dimmer, like it knew she didn't belong here. Her shoes, still wet from the rain, squeaked slightly against the polished tile. The boardroom door stood open. Inside, the lights were low, except for the full wall-length screen that glowed with data. A shifting grid of moving nodes, routes, and cost-saving percentages that pulsed like the heartbeat of a living system. At the head of the room stood Richard Thornton. Alone. No board members, no security. Just the man whose voice had once thundered through these walls with billion-dollar anxiety. He turned when he heard her enter. Zarah stopped just inside the doorway, uncertain whether to speak. "Hi, sir. You asked for me." He nodded slowly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, though sharp, investor-cut eyes, were focused in a way that made her breath hitch. "You put something under my door," he said quietly. "A flash drive." Zarah hesitated. Yes. You rewrote the supply chain algorithm." She blinked. "No, I didn't." He raised an eyebrow, his voice a touch colder. "Then who did?" Zarah's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to lie, to protect, to stay safe. But her daughter's voices echoed in her mind. "Just tell the truth." "My daughters," she said. "Lily and Lucy. They're 9. The silence that followed was long and thick and full of incredulity. "You're telling me," he finally said, walking slowly toward her, "that 2 children solved a problem that's broken 10 of the best engineers in the country?" "Yes." Her voice didn't waver. "They didn't know they weren't supposed to be able to." He studied her, searching for cracks in the absurdity of her claim, but he found none. "Sit," he said. She did. Thornton walked back to the boardroom screen and tapped a few keys on his tablet. The simulation replayed again, that same cascade of perfect efficiency, the airless dance of logic and optimization. "This," he said, "is impossible, and yet, it's here." He turned back to her. "So let me ask you, Zarah, what exactly do you think I should do now?" She looked at him, fully for the first time. He didn't look powerful right now. He looked shaken, like a man who glimpsed something divine in a place he least expected it. "You could ignore it," she said. "Pretend it came from one of your own. Pretend I never existed. My girls and I can disappear. We've done it before." Thornton didn't move, she continued. "You can do what people like me don't expect from people like you. You can listen. You can reward truth. You can protect them." Thunder rumbled faintly beyond the glass windows. Somewhere far below, the streets churned with the traffic of lives lived in the margins. Richard Thornton's jaw tightened. Then he sat down across from her. "I want to meet them," he said. Zarah exhaled, shaky, relieved, terrified, all at once. And in that moment, something shifted, not in the air, not in the algorithm, but in the heart of a man who had built an empire on logic, and suddenly found himself undone by a pair of crayons, and questions no adult had bothered to ask. The game had changed, and Zarah Miller was no longer just cleaning up after it. She had entered the board. It was raining again, harder this time, like the sky itself was trying to cleanse something too heavy for words. The drops lashed the windows of Thornton Technologies, racing down in frantic rivers, blurring the city below. Inside the towering headquarters, under the cold glow of tungsten lights and million-dollar silence, Zarah stood with her twin daughters just outside the executive elevator. They were the smallest people in the largest building, but this time, no one was cleaning. No one was hiding. A suited assistant waited nearby. Flustered and speechless, she kept glancing between the twins, wide-eyed, messy-haired, clutching matching notebooks in the CEO's office, as though trying to decide if this was a dream, a mistake, or the beginning of something that could not be undone. Richard Thornton himself had demanded their presence, not in secret, not in whispers, publicly. The elevator doors dinged open. Zarah stepped out first, adjusting the hem of the only decent blouse she owned. The twins followed, flanking her like loyal satellites, Lily bouncing on her toes, Lucy solemn and analytical, her eyes scanning everything like data points waiting to be mapped. Thornton stood at the end of the hallway, alone again. He looked different today. The sharp edges of arrogance had dulled. His suit still fit like power, but the tie was looser, the shoulders slightly sunken, not in defeat, but in realization. He wasn't the smartest man in the room anymore, and it was liberating him. "Come in," he said. The girls didn't hesitate. They marched into the boardroom like it was their classroom. Thornton gestured for everyone to sit. A table that had hosted generals, presidents, and venture capitalists now belonged to a janitor's children and the man whose empire they had. Save Zarah sat like she might be asked to leave at any moment. But Thornton turned to the twins. "I watched your code last night," he said. "I've watched it 37 times since." Lily grinned. "It's fun, isn't it? When it starts looping and learning." Thornton didn't smile. Not yet. He simply nodded. It did something no system has ever done before, not just solving the problem, but thinking outside the framework. It chose to skip perfection in favor of stability. It learned to let go. Lucy leaned forward, voice calm. Because perfect models never survive real-world chaos, people forget that. Thornton blinked. Zarah's fingers curled into her lap. She was waiting for the inevitable, the disbelief, the patronizing tone, the polite dismissal, but none came. Instead, Richard Thornton, the man who had once dismissed janitorial staff as part of the background, turned toward the wall behind him and clicked a remote. The screen lit up. A logo, fresh, stark. The L&L Initiative. Talent has no till beneath it. 3 photos. Lily, Lucy, and Zarah. I'm creating something new, he said. A division where raw intelligence, not pedigree, will lead. Where children like yours aren't laughed out of the room, but invited in. A think tank, a school, a lab, and it's going to start with them. Zarah couldn't breathe. How? Fund their education for life. Thornton continued. Tutors, mentors, global exposure. Full creative freedom. They won't just be the future, they'll shape it. Lily's jaw dropped. We get our own lab. Thornton finally smiled. And naming rights. Lucy leaned sideways toward her sister. We should call it the Wonder Room. Zarah swallowed hard. Her eyes well, and she fought it. Not here. Not now. There's one more thing, Thornton said, and this is for you, Zarah. She looked up. You saw something no one else did. You trusted them. You broke the rules not for yourself, but for the truth. That's what this company needs more than ever. He reached into a leather folder and slid a contract across the table. Director of Community Innovation and Talent Discovery, Zarah Miller. I want you leading the search for others like them, everywhere. Schools, shelters, libraries, places we never look. Zarah stared at the offer, her name printed in bold where a mop schedule used to hang. Her voice cracked when she spoke. I clean floors. Thornton met her gaze. You cleaned up our future. For the first time in years, Zarah allowed herself to cry, right there in the glass tower. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being seen. The storm outside rolled deeper. Lightning flared against the glass, and inside the boardroom, a legacy was being rewritten by the little girls and the woman who dared to believe they mattered. Not because the world gave her permission, but because she no longer needed it. 1 year later, the lobby of Thornton Technologies looked different. Gone were the sterile white walls and silent, polished floors that once made people whisper as they walked. Now, bursts of color lined the hallways, drawings, data visualizations, prototype sketches, and 3D models of things that hadn't existed a year ago. Voices rang through the atrium, young voices, eager ones. Laughter echoed from floors where suits once kept silence sacred. A new plaque hung above the entrance. The L&L Innovation Wing, where possibility begins. Just beneath it, in a sleek glass frame, was a scuffed old janitor badge, worn thin at the edges. The name on it, Zarah Miller. It no longer opened mop closets. It opened minds. Inside the glass-walled lab at the heart of the new wing, Lily and Lucy Miller sat in command of something unlike anything they'd ever imagined. A research hub filled with kids from every walk of life. No entrance exams, no gatekeepers, just curiosity. Lily was leading a design session on multi-dimensional pattern recognition, drawing on the wall in neon markers. Lucy stood beside a group of interns, some barely older. Then she was breaking down an energy optimization puzzle for sustainable data centers. They weren't child prodigies in the corner anymore. They were the center. Behind the glass, Zarah stood in tailored black slacks and a deep blue blouse that she still didn't feel entirely comfortable in. Her ID badge clipped near her heart now bore the title, Director of Human Spark Discovery. Zarah Miller had just returned from a scouting trip to a school in Detroit, where a 12-year-old girl had built a miniature particle accelerator out of broken vending machine parts. She smiled thinking of it. She'd be here into weeks. Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. You've changed everything. Zarah turned. Richard Thornton stood there. No longer the storm-racked titan from a year ago, but something calmer. Grayer at the edges, humble in a way that once would have seemed like weakness. Now, it looked like wisdom. I didn't change anything, Zarah said, turning back to the glass. Watching her daughters teach doctoral students, they did. Thornton nodded slowly. You know, I used to think intelligence was the most important resource in the world. He paused. But I was wrong. Zarah arched a brow. And what is it then? Belief, he said. The willingness to believe it can come from anywhere. Even everywhere. The lab doors opened. and a buzz of sound spilled out a dozen. Languages, ideas, imaginations colliding into a rhythm no algorithm could replicate. The media didn't know what to make of it. Investors had called it a PR miracle. Others said it was madness. But the numbers spoke louder. Thornton Technologies had not only recovered, it had surpassed every projection, and it had done so by breaking its own rules. Later that evening, the Innovation Wing hosted its first global stream event, Young Spark Summit. Kids from 30 countries shared breakthroughs in real time. The stage belonged to Lily and Lucy, who stood beneath a massive screen displaying a moving neural graph that shimmered like constellations. Lily stepped to the mic, eyes wide with joy. "We started in a bedroom, just a whiteboard and too many ideas." Lucy grinned. "And now we're here because someone gave us a chance." Lily finished. "So if you're watching this and you're 9 or you're 49 and no one sees you yet, don't wait. Build anyway. Break the rules if you have to. Be the glitch in the system, because sometimes the best answers come from the ones who were never invited to the meeting." Thunderous applause. Somewhere backstage, Zarah watched her daughters take a bow. Her hands no longer smelled of bleach. Her back no longer ached from long nights on marble floors, but her heart felt heavier than ever, not from sorrow, from gratitude, from awe, from knowing that everything she'd scrubbed, every sleepless night, every insult swallowed in silence, had led here. And as the lights dimmed and the screen behind her daughters lit up with the words, "The future is already here," Zarah Miller closed her eyes and whispered 3 words she hadn't dared to believe in for years. "We made it." And the world, for once, stood still and listened.